Okay, welcome to the Chess Kids Lunchtime Lecture Series. We're going to be looking today at a smothered checkmate. That's our theme for today, and I've got quite a few games or positions to show you today, so we're going to get through these hopefully as quick as possible, and so you can see not just one but a few different games. All right, the first thing is a smothered checkmate. What is a smothered checkmate? Well, it's a situation where one person's king looks really safe. He's protected by all his own pieces. It looks like it's really safe. And then there's a surprise checkmate that comes in and gets him. So we're going to see that. The first example of this smothered checkmate that we're going to look at is actually a very famous game because it's the shortest game that was ever played between two grandmasters. Now you would imagine that normally two grandmasters, both extremely good players, they're going to be playing for 30, 40, 50, 60, 100 moves. Okay, particularly if they're very evenly matched. This game took just 6 moves. Right. Now obviously no grandmaster is going to fall for a 4-move checkmate, and you would have thought that no grandmaster is going to fall for a 6-move checkmate, but this game ended in just 6 moves. And we're going to have a quick look through this game, and we're going to look particularly at the final position to see the smothered checkmate. So White's first move was controlling the center of the board. We know that that's a good idea. These 4 squares here in the middle of the board, you want to try and control the center of the board with those 4 squares. So that's White's first move. Queen's pawn opening, controlling the center of the board. All right, Black plays is knight into the attack, which is a little bit unusual to get the knight out first. Most of the time you're moving your pawn forwards first, but the knight off the back row on the first move does the same thing as moving the pawn on the first move. Okay, it still uses his knight to attack these 2 squares in the middle of the board. All right, so it's still controlling the center of the board. The idea is exactly the same. It's just that he's chosen to move his knight first instead of his pawn, and there's nothing wrong with that. The main plan for White, or for either side in any opening, is to try and get 2 pawns next to each other in the center of the board. But if White advances his pawn forwards now to get the 2 pawns next to each other, that pawn wall, it fails to knight takes pawn. And now White's just given away a pawn for nothing. So that doesn't work out at all. The usual move that White would do here would be to advance his pawn to c4. That's normally what most people do because you get your 2 pawns next to each other on c4 and d4. It's not right in the middle of the board, but it's just one step off to the side, and you've still got your wall of pawns, so it's still a very attacking formation. So that's normally the move that White would play, but in this game the grandmaster was very keen to get his 2 pawns next to each other on e4 and d4. But we've already seen he can't do that straight away, so he needs to move something to protect that square. So he plays knight to d2, using his knight to protect e4, and then next move he can advance his pawn forwards to e4. He'll have his wall of pawns in the middle of the board, very powerful formation, and he's got his knight backing it up. Okay, he's chosen a strange square for his knight. He's moved his knight to d2, which does have a couple of drawbacks. It stops this bishop from coming into the attack, and it stops the queen from coming into the attack. Okay, so it's sort of blocking himself in. It's definitely very defensive, and the reason that he was trying to put his knight there to cover the e4 square was what he's aiming for, like his ideal position, is he wants to have his pawn forwards here. Right, so the knight's protecting it. Got the 2 pawns next to each other in the center of the board. And he also wants to be able to move his pawn forwards on c3 and get a pawn chain. Pawn protecting pawn protecting pawn in the middle of the board. So that's what he's aiming for, with his knight protecting e4, and he can get a pawn chain to protect d4. Okay, so that's his plan. Black comes up with this really interesting move now, straight away, fighting back for the center of the board. Pawn to e5. Okay, it's attacking in the center of the board. It gets his bishop off the back row, releases his queen into the attack. So, yeah, lots of good things, following all those main strategies for the start of the game. Again, there is a drawback for that move, and the drawback for that move should be pretty obvious. It can just get taken. All right, there is nothing protecting that pawn. So White could just go, well, thank you very much, I'll take you, free pawn. And that's exactly what he does. He's got an opportunity to take a pawn. Why not? Let's see what black's plan is. How's he going to get this pawn back? And if he can get that pawn back, then he'll be back to equal. So his knight's in danger. He moves his knight out of the way, and he's using his knight to attack that pawn. Okay, so the knight can now come backwards and take out the pawn on e5. And once he does that, let's say his knight does move, take the pawn, he's got his knight in the middle of the board. He can advance his pawn forwards to d5 and have a pawn in the middle of the board as well, and he'll have a pretty strong position in the center of the board. And white doesn't have anything in the middle of the board yet. So that's black's plan. Now, white sort of helped black along the way. White played pawn to h3, and the pawn going forwards to h3 attacks the knight, and attacking the knight doesn't really do anything good. Okay, if we think about the 3 golden rules, it's certainly not controlling the center of the board with that move. He's not helping to get any of his pieces off the back row and into the attack. Right? Particularly those 4 pieces need to come off the back row and into the attack. And it's certainly not helping white to castle. Right? White's king has to try and get safe, and he can do castling with one of his rooks, but putting the pawn to h3 doesn't help with any of those things. So, not a very good move. Not a very good move. Here's where black comes up with his great move. Just a really amazing move. Anyone who knows the answer, feel free to type that into your chat box. Tell me if you think you know, what move would black do in this position? And we try and use the idea of a smother. Okay, a smothered checkmate or a smothered attack is when someone's got a piece that looks really safe. Like in this instance, white's queen. White's queen looks really safe. It's got pieces all around it. Okay, there's something next to the queen in every direction. There's knight, bishop, pawns, even the king. So that queen looks incredibly safe. But black can take advantage of the fact that the queen is smothered by its own pieces. Even though it's safe, it can't actually move anywhere. And if it can't move anywhere, it's sort of blocked in, it might make it easier to trap it. So if you know what move to play, just type it into your chat box so I can see what you guys are thinking as well. And we've got a couple of people right, so good work, Karen, for your group, who's got your knight moving in to e3. So when the knight moves, the knight is now attacking the queen. Okay. What can white's queen do? Can't move anywhere. Right? You can't block a knight off when a knight's attacking you, and there's only really one thing that you can do because you can't move your queen anywhere. So a knight is one of the best pieces for doing a smothered attack on a queen or a smothered checkmate, which is what we're looking at today. So the knight comes up, attacks the queen. White's only got one choice. The only move he can do is to take the knight. Okay, he's got his pawn, which is covering his weak spot, and the pawn can take the knight. So off he goes, pawn takes knight, but that leaves the weak spot open. And because the pawn from h3 moved, the g3 square is weak. So in fact, all of these squares along this diagonal line are now wide open. Black's got nothing protecting them. And black just played queen out to h4, and the queen is now attacking the king, so there's a check. And really, white's only got one way of getting out of this one. He can't take the queen. There's only one thing he can do to put something in the way to block it off, and that's to do pawn to g3. When he does pawn to g3, black simply takes that pawn and says checkmate. And this is a smothered checkmate because here, white's king looks like it's safe. Right? He's got all these pieces surrounding his king. He's got a couple of pawns in front. He's got a knight, queen, bishop, other knight, everything that he could possibly hope to have surrounding his king. But here, there's just one little gap. Right? There's just one little gap. There's one way that the queen can come in through all of those defenses. And because white's king can't move anywhere else, he's sort of smothered himself in. He's blocked himself in. He's locked himself in his own little room. So white's king is now in smothered checkmate. All right, and that was actually 6 moves, a 6-move checkmate, the shortest game that 2 grandmasters ever played. And I can tell you that white was very embarrassed by losing that quickly, because it looks like his king's really safe, and then boom, comes in with a smothered checkmate. All right, we're going to have a look at another smothered checkmate possibility with this game that is a common opening trap. So we're just going to have a look at the first couple of moves. Okay, this first move here that black plays is what we call a Caro-Can opening. And this was very popular about 10 to 20 years ago, because Garry Kasparov, who was the best player in the world, he was the world champion, Garry Kasparov used to play this opening all the time. So it became a very popular opening. But there's a little trick that white can do to get a checkmate if black doesn't notice it. So we're going to go through these moves. Okay, white gets his 2 pawns in the center of the board. All right, 2 pawns next to each other. Most powerful attacking formation, that's good. Black's plan with the Caro-Can is to get his pawn chain, 3 pawns in a diagonal line, counter-attacking into the center of the board. Okay, best move for white is to get the knight off the back row, protecting with his knight. So he keeps his wall of pawns in the middle of the board, and he starts developing a piece off the back row and into the attack. Black doesn't want white to keep the wall of pawns. It is too strong, so you've got to take it away, and the knight just takes it back. So that's a fair trade, pawn for pawn, and now white ends up with 2 pieces in the middle of the board, and black can still counterattack. This is still a good position for black. He's got to get his knight off the back row to start off with, and now white plays a really sneaky move, which is a little bit unusual. He's developing his queen really early on. And you might think, oh, well, he's got his queen and his knight, 2 pieces off the back row, because he's planning to get this bishop into the attack. And then once the bishop's in the attack, then you could probably start to get your king safe and castling. All right? And that's what white wants black to think is going to happen. Okay. The normal move here for black, which is what black would always do, is just develop some more pieces. So bring the knight off the back row and into the attack. But this is actually a normal move, but a big mistake. So what move can white play now to take advantage of black's ordinary looking move? You know, it's a good move, it's developing a piece, it's moving towards the center, but it's missing what white's big threat is. And there is a smothered checkmate coming up in just one move. If you can work out what white's next move will be to deliver a smothered checkmate to black. So just type that into your box when you think you know. Okay, we've got a smothered checkmate possibility. Let's have a look at black's king. Right, black's king is surrounded by pieces. Knights, queens, pawns, bishop, everything you could possibly imagine. All of those pieces are surrounding black's king, and black's king looks incredibly safe. You think, well, it's impossible to get a checkmate here. Right? How are you going to break through all of those defenses and get black's king into a checkmate? Well, there's just one move. All right, we've had a few suggestions, but none of them are correct at the moment. Let's have a quick look. If the knight takes the knight, all right, that's good because that's check. Right? But easy enough for black to get out of check. Kill, block, or run. His knight just takes your knight, and then he's safe. Okay, so let's go back to where we were at the start and think about it again. How can white do a checkmate? We've got some people suggesting more than one move in a row. Well, it's all very well. Yes, you could move your knight out here and start aiming for the weak spot. Then get your queen into the attack. All right, and then your queen's pointing down towards the weak spot as well. And then your queen could take the weak spot, backed up by the knight. All right, and that would be great. The knight's protecting the queen. That would be checkmate, definitely. But that's 3 moves. You've got to think about what black might do in the meantime. As soon as you move your knight out there, he might move his pawn up, and you go for it with your queen. Then he gets his bishop, and black's ready to castle next move. All right, and your checkmate is nowhere to be seen. So keep thinking. This is a tricky one. What can white do to get a checkmate in one move? Okay, well, I'm going to show you the move. White's next move was knight to d6. See, when he moves his knight, right, instead of the queen being blocked, the queen is now open all the way through towards the king. So now, if black tries to do pawn takes knight, right, that's an illegal move because it opens up his own king, and his king's going to be in check with white's queen. Right, so you can't take the knight. You can't block a knight off because a knight just jumps over the top of any pieces that you put in the way. And black's king is smothered in on all directions by his own pieces. He can't move his king anywhere because his queen, his knight, his bishop, his pawns are all in the way. So again, black's king looks really safe, but we have here a smothered checkmate where the knight is attacking the king, jumping over the top of the pawns, attacking the king, and black's king can't move anywhere to get out of it. All right, so we have a smothered checkmate. King can't move anywhere. Now, we look at these sorts of games. We watch grandmaster games. We watch famous players who are playing their matches so that we can learn those same ideas and those same strategies and put them into games of our own. Now, you'll probably never get exactly the same game. In fact, you're almost certainly never going to get exactly the same game. But you can get a similar game. All right? I'm going to show you that I learned this trap, and then I was able to actually put that into a real game that I played because I saw a similar situation. It wasn't exactly the same situation, but it was very similar. And I could use this idea and say, hey, a smothered checkmate, I've seen that before. I think I could do that in my game here. All right, I'm going to show you the game that I played, and just remember this final position where the king's smothered in. He's locked in by all his own pieces, and the knight just hops over the top of them all and delivers a nice checkmate, a smothered checkmate. So we're going to go on and see the next game, which is actually a game that I played. And this game that I played was, I was white. I was playing against a boy called Derek Ear. Now, Derek was a national player. This was in inter-school championships, and I'm not sure, I can't remember whether it was a state championships or a national championships, but Derek and his team got into both state and national championships. Very good team, very good player, and of course I want to try and make sure I win this game because my whole team's relying on me to win games. The more I win, the better the team goes. So we started this game off in a sort of a normal opening. It's called a Sicilian defense. Right? I get my pawn to control the center of the board. He puts his pawn onto c5, which means that now if I try for my pawn into the middle of the board, he can take me. I don't have my wall of pawns anymore. Okay, so both fighting for the center of the board. Okay, so when I put my pawn into the middle of the board, get my wall of pawns, no problems. He can take me, or in this game he chooses to counterattack and get a wall of pawns of his own. Now this is an interesting battle. We've both got a wall of pawns in the center of the board. Right? Nobody wants the other person to keep a wall of pawns. Those two walls of pawns aren't going to last very long. Right? One person's going to break and take the other person's pawn very shortly. Right? So get rid of his wall of pawns. He takes his knight off the back row into the attack. Right? He doesn't have to take that pawn straight away. His queen can come up and take the pawn, but then maybe I can attack his queen. If he puts his knight off the back row, I can't really protect that pawn, and next move he's going to take it. So I play bishop up to c4, and you can see he can still take it, and if I take him, he takes me back, and he's got his queen in the middle of the board. Right, so he's developed a piece off the back row. He chooses not to take that pawn, but to develop his other knight. Right, so we're starting to see, well, actually here, just so you can see, he couldn't develop his knight to c6 now, which is the normal place you want to develop your knight, because my pawn will just take him. So that's why when he wants to develop his knight, he develops it off the back row and he has to go to d7. But we're starting to see black's king is now locked in by all of his own pieces. So we're starting to see some possibilities for a smothered mate, okay, because black's king is locked in by all of his own pieces. And he looks very safe. He looks very safe. Knight pawn takes pawn. He can take that pawn back, no problems. He chooses to do it with the queen. Okay, so he's gone queen out. That puts the king in check. And at the same time, the queen comes across to attack my pawn. So it's a little fork. And then when I get out of check, he can just take the pawn if he wants to. So I develop my knight off the back row. Okay, we're 2 pieces off the back row into the attack. He's got 3 pieces off the back row into the attack. So he's a little bit ahead on development, but if we look in the center of the board, okay, those 4 squares in the middle of the board, I've got a bit better control over the middle. I've got my knight, bishop, pawn, queen all pointing into the middle, and his queen's off on the edge of the board. So I'm happy that I don't mind that I've got only 2 pieces developed instead of his 3, because my pieces are in better positions. They're all closer towards the middle of the board. He takes that pawn that we expected, so it's back to equal. I took his pawn, he got to take me back. So he takes me back with a queen, and now I start developing my queen. Now, I chose my queen because I've got to protect my bishop here. Right? His queen's attacking my bishop. And I put my queen here because I'm setting up a protection for the bishop, but also my queen is now directly in line with his king. So I'm going to have some opportunities, if I can get rid of his pawn in front of his king, I'm going to have some opportunities perhaps to attack and threaten his king. He played queen back to c7. He doesn't want to leave his queen out in the open now, and I decided to hit his queen again. I played knight to b5, attacking his queen. Yep. So there you go, my knight's attacking his queen. I've got my knight, my queen, my bishop and my queen all developed off the background of the attack. They're all 3 pieces in the attack against his 3 pieces in the attack. Still, my only advantage is I've got a bit better control over the center, and he has to do something about his queen, which is in danger. So he moves his queen out of the way, puts me in check. Alright, got to get my king out of check. Best way to do that is to try and develop a piece and block it off at the same time. So if I put my bishop here, my bishop is now attacking his queen, and I'm not in check anymore. So that's a developing move and a threat on black's queen. Black doesn't have many good spots for his queen to go. Like, let's have a look. If he just moves his queen back 1 step, I can win his queen with a fork. My knight moves into c7. My knight's got an attack on the rook and a check. So I'm threatening 2 of his pieces. As well as the rook, the king, I've also got the knight attacking his queen. So we could call that a family fork. I've got his whole family in trouble there. I've got his rook, his queen, and his king. 3 pieces all in danger. So what can black do? He's got to save one of them, and of course you can only ever choose to save the king. If the king's in danger, you must save the king, and then my knight is going to take his queen for nothing. Okay, so that's going to be a problem. If he moves his queen back, if he moves his queen forwards, he's faced with a very similar sort of thing. My knight can still come into c7 and get a fork on the queen, on the king and the rook. I haven't got his queen, but I've got his king and his rook, so I'm going to get at least a rook for nothing. So what can he do with his queen? Well, he chose to move his queen all the way back to d8. He figured, well, I'm sick of my queen being attacked all the time. You can see in this game he's moved his queen 1, 2, 3, 4 times in a row. All right, so from this start position, he moved his queen out, he moved his queen again, he moved his queen again, and he's moved his queen again. So he moved his queen 4 times in a row. Never a good idea to move the same piece more than once in an opening. Right? Get each piece off the back row and try and put it in its best possible spot the first time. Black's been running around with his queen the whole time, is finally sick of his queen being attacked all the time, and decides to just head his queen right back to where it started, keep it safe. And his queen does look safe. You know, he's got pieces surrounding it. Black's king certainly looks safe because he's got pieces surrounding it. What's my checkmate? What move did I do now to deliver a checkmate to black? And it's very similar, like I said, to the game that I showed you before, that trap from the Caro-Kann opening. Very similar sort of position, and even though it wasn't exactly the same game, that's what learning in chess is all about. You see a game, you see a situation, you see a position, you see a smothered checkmate, you see a tactic, and then when you're playing your game, it's not exactly the same, but it's something that reminds you, oh yeah, I've seen something a little bit like this before. And it reminds you of one of those things that you've learned. Right? So very good for those 3 or 4 people who've come up with the correct move here. The move is the same checkmate move as we saw in the last game. Knight comes into d6. Right? The knight is now attacking the king. Okay, so we've got the knight attacking the king, and black's pawn is pinned. the pawn, oops, get rid of those ones, sorry, the pawn can't take the knight, because if it tries to do that, it's going to be in check with my queen. So black's pawn is pinned, can't move anywhere at all. So if the pawn's pinned, you can't take the knight, can't block a knight off, because knights just jump over the top of whatever you throw in their way, and all of black's pieces have actually suffocated his own king. His king can't run anywhere because he's got his own pieces surrounding him totally. So there we have a nice smothered checkmate. And that was something that I'd learnt from the previous example. And that's what you guys need to do. Every time that you see a strategy or trick or a tactic or something that I show you here, think about that, put it into your memory bank somewhere, and then when you're playing a game, you won't see exactly the same thing, but you might see something similar. And you go, oh, that reminds me of something David showed me. You could do a great checkmate like this or like that. All right, this smothered checkmate even works with grandmasters. Our last example, right, is this position between two of the best, some of the best grandmasters in the world today. Right, this is a fairly recent game. This was played within the last, I think it was about 5 years ago. Judith Polgar, who was white in this position, she is the best female chess player ever. Right, she was ranked in the top 5 or 6 players in the world, both men and women. In fact, she was the only girl in the top 100 players in the world. 99 top players in the world, boys. Judith Polgar is the only girl out of the top 100 to make it into the top 100. She didn't just make it to the top 100, she made it right to the top 5. Vladimir Kramnik, he has been number 1 in the world, he's been number 2 in the world, he's floating around about the top, I think he's about number 3 or 4 at the moment, but he was world champion after Garry Kasparov. He beat Garry Kasparov in a match to win the world championships. So these two are some of the best players that you'll see, and black here got a smothered checkmate in 2 moves. Okay, so white's king is the one that we want to try and get in checkmate. Okay, we're trying to get white's king in checkmate, and we have to first of all look at where the smother is going to come from. Well, he's got his rook and his pawn stopping his king from moving anywhere. Black's bishop covers the square to the side. He's got his other pawn in the way, so it's almost smothered in already because black's bishop's covering b1. He's sort of locked his own king in. Looks safe, but it's sort of locked in. The only place he can go, or try to go, is to d2, and black's rook's got that covered as well. So all we need to do really is put the king in check. All right? And if it's check, then it's going to be a checkmate. So what did black do to get a smothered checkmate from here in 2 moves? Okay, 2-move checkmate from this position. Tricky, very tricky. All right, we think about a few possibilities. Well, I'm going to show you the moves, and you guys can test out all the other possibilities later on. Okay, so I'm going to show you the moves that were played in the game, and you can say, well, gee, why did that work? Why couldn't he have done something different? Why couldn't he have done something different? If you want to check out all of the alternatives, all the different possibilities, I highly recommend that you do that. Take this as a video off YouTube or off the website later on. Get to this position, pause it, and really try and have a think about what other possibilities could have happened and why there was going to be checkmate no matter what. So black's brilliant move was rook takes pawn. Okay, moves his rook across. Okay, so from f2 across to c2, and rook takes the pawn, puts white into check. Now, white's in check. You must get out of check. And you think about 3 things if you're in check. Can I kill, block, or run away? Okay, there's a couple of things he can do to take that rook. Firstly, he can use the bishop to take the rook. He can just retreat. Secondly, he could use the knight to take the rook. So black's done a really crazy looking move. He's put himself in a situation where 2 pieces could take him, the knight or the bishop. The king can't take the rook, because if the king tries to take the rook, black's knight is waiting to protect it. But he's got 2 pieces. Can't block it off because it's so close, and the king can't move anywhere. Okay, if he tries to go to b1, the bishop's got him. If he tries to go out to d2, the rook's got him. So Kill, block, or run. The only thing you can do is decide to take it. So which piece do you want to take it with? Do you want to take it with the knight, or do you want to take it with the bishop? If you're Judith Polgar, you've got to make a decision. Which one do you want to take with? All right, we'll just go with the first suggestion that came in. The first suggestion was knight takes. All right, so if the knight takes that, you've got your bishop protecting your knight, your rook's there, your pawn's there. White's king looks incredibly safe, doesn't it? Looks very safe. All those pieces surrounding it, right? But it's not safe. The next move that black played was knight to b3, smothered checkmate. Okay, he's got his knight covering the d2 and attacking the king, and even though there's all of these pieces surrounding White's king, they're actually just blocking the king from moving anywhere. So the king can't move to any of those squares. It would even be better if some of those pieces were gone. So White's king looks really safe, but it's actually against checkmate. All right, when we go back to the start and we say, well, which piece? We could also try taking with the bishop. Okay, and then the same thing happens. There's still a smothered checkmate. This time the knight goes the other direction. It goes onto e2 and attacks the king. So there's the check. The queen covers the escape square on d2, and all of White's pieces, the bishop, the rook, the pawn, that look like they're protecting the king, are actually just blocking the king so the king can't move out of the way. So there we have another smothered checkmate. So no matter what happened there, after that first brilliant move, rook takes c2, no matter which way you took it back, it was going to end up with a smothered checkmate. So I hope you guys have seen that smothered checkmate a few times now, and that's going to stick in your memory bank. And when you're playing a game, you get an opportunity to do a similar sort of thing, a similar position. You might be able to find yourself a smothered checkmate. So just because your opponent's king's surrounded by his own pieces doesn't mean that he's safe. It might look safe, but it's not guaranteed to be safe.